The evening air carried a hint of excitement as limousines and luxury cars lined up outside the Vatican's concert hall. The annual charity event hosted by Pope Leo XIV had become one of the most anticipated gatherings in Rome, attracting not only the religious elite but also artists, politicians, and philanthropists from across Europe. Inside, the hall sparkled under crystal chandeliers. Red velvet seats filled quickly as guests in formal attire exchanged polite greetings and admired the ornate gold leaf decorations that adorned the ceiling. The Pope's events were always elegant affairs, but this year held special significance. World-famous pianist Anton Berardi had agreed to perform, bringing unprecedented attention to their fundraiser for children's hospitals. Pope Leo XIV, a man in his late 60s with kind eyes and silver hair, moved through the crowd with a gentle smile. Unlike some of his predecessors who maintained a distance from their guests, Leo was known for his warm approach and genuine interest in people. He stopped often to shake hands or exchange a few words, his white robes standing out among the sea of black tuxedos and colorful evening gowns. "Your Holiness, everything is prepared for tonight's performance," whispered Father Domenico, his personal assistant who rarely left his side. "Maestro Berardi has arrived and is preparing backstage." "Wonderful," the Pope replied, his voice soft but carrying a natural authority. "I've been looking forward to hearing him play in person for many years." What few people knew was that Pope Leo had a deep personal love for classical music. Before joining the priesthood, he had studied piano for nearly a decade. Though he rarely mentioned this part of his past, music had remained his private joy throughout his religious career. Cardinal Rossi, head of Vatican finances, approached with a broad smile. "Your Holiness, we've already surpassed last year's donation total, and the performance hasn't even begun. Berardi's name on the program has worked wonders." "It's not about the name, Antonio," Leo gently corrected. "It's about the gift God has given him and his willingness to share it for our cause." The lights dimmed 3 times, signaling guests to take their seats. Pope Leo was led to the center of the front row, where a slightly larger chair awaited him. He preferred sitting among the audience rather than in a special box, another small way he differed from tradition. The stage lights brightened, revealing a magnificent black grand piano at the center. The hall fell silent as Anton Berardi walked out, his confident stride and slight smile suggesting he was perfectly at home in such prestigious surroundings. At 43, Berardi had been the darling of classical music for nearly 2 decades. Known as much for his passionate interpretations as for his occasional arrogance. He bowed deeply toward the Pope, then to the wider audience before settling at the piano. His fingers hovered above the keys for a dramatic moment before launching into Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. From the first notes, it was clear why Berardi commanded such respect. His playing had a rare emotional quality that made even those unfamiliar with classical music lean forward in their seats. Pope Leo closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. He recognized the technical brilliance, of course, but more importantly, he felt the story Berardi was telling through Chopin's notes, moments of tenderness giving way to thundering passion, then retreating to contemplative quiet. When the piece ended, the audience erupted in applause. Berardi acknowledged them with a nod before moving to his second selection, a technically demanding piece by Liszt that showcased his exceptional skill. His fingers flew across the keys at impossible speeds, drawing gasps from those who understood the difficulty of what they were witnessing. During a particularly complex passage, something unexpected happened. A high note from the piano rang out with a slightly strange metallic quality, barely noticeable to most but clear to those with trained ears. A small technical flaw in the instrument had affected the sound. Berardi's expression darkened momentarily as he continued playing. To most of the audience, the performance remained flawless, but the pianist knew better. And so did Pope Leo. During the applause following this second piece, the Pope leaned toward Father Domenico and whispered something. Though his voice was low in the brief moment between clapping, Berardi overheard the Pope mention something about the piano needing attention and that passage sounding unusual. What happened next stunned everyone present. Berardi stood at his piano and, instead of announcing his next piece as expected, cleared his throat and addressed the audience with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for your kind reception. Before continuing, I'd like to share something amusing. His voice carried throughout the perfect acoustics of the hall. I couldn't help but overhear our gracious host offering his opinions on the piano's condition. It seems we have a music critic in our presence tonight. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. No one spoke about the Pope this way, certainly not in his presence and never with such obvious mockery. Perhaps His Holiness would prefer to tune the instrument himself, or maybe offer suggestions on my technique. I wasn't aware the Vatican had become a conservatory of music as well as religion. The hall fell completely silent. Cardinal Rossi's face flushed red with anger, while several other church officials looked on in horror. Pope Leo himself maintained a neutral expression, though those who knew him well could see the surprise in his eyes. Berardi, perhaps realizing he had crossed a line but too proud to retreat, added with forced lightness, "I'm simply suggesting that some matters might be best left to experts in their field. I don't offer advice on prayer, after all." The silence deepened. A photographer who had been quietly documenting the event from the side snapped several pictures, images that would appear in newspapers around the world the next day. Father Domenico started to rise, perhaps to say something in defense of the Pope, but Leo placed a gentle hand on his arm, keeping him seated. Instead, the Pope did something unexpected. He smiled at Berardi and offered a small nod, as if accepting the rebuke. "Please continue with your beautiful music, Maestro," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard in the front rows. "We are all eager to hear more." The simple dignity of the response seemed to unsettle Berardi more than any angry retort might have. He turned back to the piano with less confidence than before, launching into his third piece, a Beethoven sonata that somehow lacked the emotional power of his earlier performances. The remainder of the concert proceeded without incident, though a tension hung in the air that hadn't been there before. When the final piece concluded, the audience applauded politely, but with less enthusiasm. Berardi bowed and quickly left the stage, bypassing the usual meet and greet that followed such performances. As guests filtered out of the hall afterward, whispered conversations focused not on the music, but on the pianist's shocking behavior. Some defended Berardi, suggesting the Pope shouldn't have commented on matters outside his expertise. Others were outraged, seeing it as a deliberate humiliation of a beloved religious leader. Back in his private apartments, Pope Leo dismissed his concerned staff with assurances that he was fine. Only Father Domenico remained, watching with concern as the Pope sat heavily in his favorite chair. "That could have gone better," Leo said with unexpected lightness in his voice. "Your Holiness, what he did was unforgivable. We should issue a statement immediately condemning his behavior and demanding an apology." "And what would that accomplish, Domenico?" The Pope looked up, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. "More division? More headlines about conflict between the church and the arts? But he publicly ridiculed you. Already my phone is filling with messages from reporters seeking comment." Pope Leo walked to the window, looking out at the lights of Rome spread below. "Give them nothing tonight. Tell them I'm reflecting on a beautiful evening of music for charity." "But that's not what happened," Father Domenico protested. "Perhaps not," the Pope said quietly, "but it's what should have happened. And, perhaps, what still might happen." As he turned from the window, an unexpected look crossed the Pope's face. Not anger or embarrassment, but something that looked almost like inspiration. Father Domenico had known Leo XIV long enough to recognize when the Holy Father was forming a plan. "Your Holiness?" he asked cautiously. "I need to think, old friend," the Pope replied, "and perhaps to practice something I haven't done in quite some time." Outside the Vatican walls, news of the confrontation was already spreading through social media and news outlets. What no one could predict was how Pope Leo XIV would respond, and how his reaction would soon astonish everyone, from the College of Cardinals to the pianist who had publicly mocked him. Morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of the papal apartments, painting colorful patterns on the stone floor. Pope Leo XIV had been awake for hours, having slept poorly after the previous night's uncomfortable encounter. He sat at his simple wooden desk, a stack of newspapers spread before him, each featuring variations of the same headline: "Famous Pianist Mocks Pope," or "Vatican Concert Turns Sour." One particularly bold tabloid had splashed across its front page: "Musical Showdown Berardi 1, Pope 0." The photo beneath showed Anton Berardi with a smug expression and Pope Leo looking startled, caught in an unflattering moment just as the pianist had begun his public ridicule. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, quickly gathering the newspapers into a pile. Father Domenico appeared, carrying a silver tray with espresso and a small plate of biscotti. The older priest had been Leo's secretary since before his election to the papacy, and few people could read the Pope's mood as well as he could. "You haven't slept?" Father Domenico observed, placing the tray on a corner of the desk. "There was much to think about," the Pope replied with a tired smile. He reached for the tiny espresso cup, grateful for the strong coffee. "I assume the phones have been ringing non-stop?" "Since dawn. Every news outlet wants a statement. Cardinal Rossi has drafted a strongly worded response condemning Berardi's behavior and defending your honor." Father Domenico pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "He requests your approval to release it immediately." Pope Leo took the paper but didn't open it. "And what are people saying?" "Not the cardinals or the press, the ordinary people." Father Domenico hesitated. "It's mixed, Your Holiness. Many are outraged on your behalf. Others—" He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Others find it amusing to see the Pope put in his place." Leo finished for him. "You can speak freely, old friend. Social media is unkind. Some are calling you out of touch, suggesting the church should stick to religion and leave the arts to artists." Berardi's fans are particularly vocal in his defense. The Pope nodded slowly. "And has Maestro Berardi himself said anything?" "His manager issued a brief statement this morning saying the pianist regrets any misunderstanding, but stopping well short of an actual apology." "A non-apology, then?" Pope Leo wasn't surprised. Men like Berardi rarely admitted when they were wrong. "Your Holiness, we must respond firmly. Your silence is being interpreted as weakness." The Pope finally unfolded Cardinal Rossi's statement and scanned it quickly. The language was dignified but pointed, emphasizing the disrespect shown not just to him personally but to his office, and by extension, to the Church itself. After reading it, Pope Leo shook his head gently. "This isn't the way, Domenico. But we can't let this pass without— Call a meeting of the senior communications staff and Cardinals Rossi, Bergamo, and Novak for 11 o'clock. I'll have a different approach to propose." He smiled slightly at Father Domenico's confused expression. "Trust me, my friend." Throughout the morning, the Vatican buzzed with speculation. Staff who normally moved with quiet efficiency through the historic hallways now paused to exchange whispers. Everyone had an opinion on how the Pope should respond to the public embarrassment. In the Apostolic Palace, 4 red-robed cardinals waited in the small conference room adjacent to the Pope's private study. Cardinal Rossi paced nervously, while the others sat in tense silence. "He'll issue the statement," Rossi said confidently. "He must. The dignity of his office demands it." Cardinal Novak, a pragmatic Hungarian with shrewd eyes, looked less certain. "Leo has never been predictable, Antonio. That's partly why we elected him." The door opened and Pope Leo entered, followed by Father Domenico carrying a leather portfolio. The cardinals rose respectfully. "Good morning, brothers," the Pope greeted them warmly. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." As they settled around the table, Leo nodded to his secretary, who distributed folders to each cardinal. Inside was not the expected press release, but something else entirely. "What is this?" Cardinal Bergamo asked, adjusting his glasses as he studied the document before him. "My response to last night's incident," Pope Leo explained calmly. Cardinal Rossi's bushy eyebrows shot upward as he read. "Your Holiness, with all respect, this is most unorthodox." "Yes," the Pope agreed simply. "It is. You want to perform yourself? At a public concert?" Cardinal Novak clarified, his voice rising slightly. Pope Leo nodded. "Not just any concert. A charity benefit for the same children's hospitals we were supporting last night, and I want to invite Maestro Berardi as my honored guest." The room erupted in objections. Cardinal Rossi was the loudest, his face flushing deeply as he insisted such an action would undermine the dignity of the papal office. Cardinal Bergamo, the oldest of the group, looked genuinely concerned for the Pope's well-being, suggesting gently that perhaps the stress of recent events had clouded his judgment. Leo let them speak, listening patiently until they had exhausted their arguments. "Brothers," he finally said, "I understand your concerns. But consider this from another perspective. What did Jesus do when faced with mockery and ridicule? This is hardly the same as the Passion, Cardinal Rossi protested. No, but the principle applies. Do we respond to mockery with defensiveness and pride, or do we find a way to transform the moment into something meaningful? The Pope leaned forward, his eyes bright with conviction. I was a pianist before I was a priest. Not at Berardi's level, certainly, but I studied seriously for many years. This is not about proving my musical abilities. It's about demonstrating that our church can respond to modern challenges with grace and creativity. Cardinal Novak, who had been quiet during the debate, finally spoke up. It's risky, Your Holiness. If it goes poorly, then I will have failed publicly, Leo acknowledged. But I believe this approach offers something a strongly worded statement never could, a chance for genuine reconciliation. The meeting continued for another hour, with the Pope patiently addressing each objection. By the end, though none of the cardinals were fully convinced, they reluctantly agreed to support his unusual plan. As the cardinals filed out, Father Domenico remained behind, concern etched on his face. You disapprove as well? The Pope asked gently. I worry, Your Holiness. It's been many years since you played regularly. Pope Leo smiled, which is why I'll need your help finding a teacher, someone discreet who can help me prepare. News of the Pope's decision spread rapidly through the Vatican, creating sharp divisions among the clergy and staff. Many younger priests admired the bold approach, seeing it as exactly the kind of fresh thinking the Church needed to stay relevant in changing times. Older, more traditional members worried about precedent and propriety. By mid-afternoon, the Vatican press office released a carefully worded statement announcing that Pope Leo XIV would host a special benefit concert in St. Peter's Basilica in 3 weeks' time, where he would personally perform a musical selection. The statement included a special invitation to Anton Berardi to attend as an honored guest, though it made no direct reference to the previous night's incident. The public reaction was immediate and intense. News channels interrupted regular programming to report on the unprecedented announcement. Social media exploded with opinions ranging from admiration to ridicule. Music critics speculated about the Pope's abilities, while religious commentators debated the appropriateness of his response. Inside his private chapel, Pope Leo knelt in prayer, seeking guidance for the path he had chosen. He wasn't naive about the risks. If he performed poorly, the embarrassment would be far greater than anything Berardi had inflicted. Yet something in his heart told him this was right. His meditation was interrupted by a call from Father Domenico. Your Holiness, I've found someone who might help with your preparation, the priest announced. Professor Gabriella Ricci, retired from the Rome Conservatory. She's 82 years old, completely trustworthy, and apparently taught piano for over 50 years. Excellent, the Pope replied. Can she come tomorrow morning? She's already on her way, Your Holiness, she said, and I quote, If the Pope needs a piano teacher, I don't see why we should wait until tomorrow. Leo laughed genuinely for the first time since the concert. I think I'll like Professor Ricci. As evening fell over Rome, Anton Berardi sat in his luxury hotel suite, staring at his phone in disbelief. His manager had just forwarded the Vatican's press release, along with dozens of messages from journalists seeking his reaction. This is absurd, he muttered. What game is he playing? His manager's voice came through the speaker. It's brilliant, actually. He's completely changed the narrative. You're no longer the artist who mocked the Pope. You're the artist the Pope invited after a misunderstanding. So what am I supposed to do? Show up and applaud while an amateur plays badly? You're supposed to say you're honored by the invitation and look forward to attending. Otherwise, you'll look petty and insecure. Berardi threw his phone onto the couch and walked to the window, looking out at the Roman skyline with the dome of St. Peter's visible in the distance. He had to admit, however grudgingly, that Pope Leo XIV had outmaneuvered him. Back at the Vatican, as night settled over the ancient buildings, a piano was quietly moved into a rarely used room in the papal apartments. Pope Leo stood watching as two workers positioned it carefully by the window. Will there be anything else, Your Holiness? One asked. No, thank you. This is perfect. As they left, Leo approached the instrument, running his fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. It had been so long since he'd played seriously. Could he really do this? The doubt that he'd kept at bay all day suddenly felt overwhelming. Taking a deep breath, he sat on the bench and began to play a simple scale, then another. His fingers felt stiff and clumsy at first, but as he continued, something familiar awakened within him, a connection to the music that had been dormant but never truly gone. Outside the door, Father Domenico listened to the halting notes gradually becoming more confident and smiled to himself. Whatever happened next, the Pope had already won something important. He had refused to let mockery diminish him. And in just 3 weeks, the world would see exactly what Pope Leo XIII was made of. Again, please. From the beginning of the third measure, Professor Gabriella Ricci tapped her wooden cane sharply against the floor as she stood beside the piano. Despite her 82 years, her hearing remained perfect, and her standards even more exacting. For 2 weeks now, she had arrived at the Vatican every morning at precisely 8 o'clock to work with her most unusual student. Pope Leo XIV nodded and repositioned his hands on the keyboard. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's cool temperature. His fingers moved across the keys, producing the delicate opening phrases of Schubert's Ave Maria. The melody flowed smoothly until he reached a particularly challenging passage, where his right hand stumbled slightly. Stop. Professor Ricci sighed and shook her head. Your Holiness, you're rushing again. This piece isn't a race to the finish line. I'm sorry, Leo said, flexing his fingers. I keep anticipating the difficult part and then hurrying through it. Music is not about getting past the difficult parts. It's about embracing them. She tapped her cane again, this time more gently. Perhaps we should take a different approach. Close your eyes. The Pope obeyed, shutting his eyes as he sat at the piano. Now don't think about the notes or your fingers. Think about what this music means to you. Why did you choose this piece above all others? Leo took a deep breath. It was my mother's favorite. She used to sing it while she worked around our home. Not the Latin words, she sang it in Italian. Her voice wasn't trained, but it was pure. Professor Ricci nodded, though he couldn't see her. Good. Now play it for her. Not for an audience at St. Peter's, not for those cardinals who doubt you, and certainly not for Anton Berardi. Play it as a gift for your mother. This time, when his fingers touched the keys, something was different. The music emerged not just from his hands, but from somewhere deeper. When he reached the difficult passage, he moved through it with unexpected grace. As the final notes faded, he opened his eyes to see Professor Ricci smiling broadly. There, she said with satisfaction. That's what we've been looking for. Not perfection, connection. You've been so worried about making mistakes that you forgot why you're doing this in the first place. A knock at the door interrupted them. Father Domenico entered, looking apologetic for the intrusion. Your Holiness, I'm sorry, but the security meeting cannot be postponed again, and you have the delegation from Portugal at 11. The Pope nodded and stood from the piano bench. Thank you for today, Professor. I feel we've made real progress. Indeed we have, she agreed, gathering her sheet music. But you must practice tonight. At least 2 hours. Leo looked at Father Domenico's already concerned face and laughed. I'll find the time, Professor. I promise. As Professor Ricci was escorted out, Cardinal Rossi was shown in. His perpetual frown had deepened over the past 2 weeks as the Pope's musical project continued, despite his ongoing objections. Your Holiness, we need to discuss the seating arrangements for the concert. The demand for tickets has been overwhelming. The Cardinal's tone suggested this was yet another problem, not a success. That's wonderful news, Pope Leo replied. How many requests have we received? Over 15,000. St. Peter's can only accommodate 4,000 safely. Then we'll prioritize the children and families from the hospitals we're supporting. After that, a lottery system for the remaining seats. And be sure we set up screens in the square outside so those without tickets can still participate. Cardinal Rossi looked pained. There's another matter. Anton Berardi has finally responded to your invitation. The Pope's eyebrows rose. And? He's accepted. His manager says he's looking forward to witnessing this historic performance. The Cardinal couldn't keep the distaste from his voice as he quoted the message. You still disapprove of this approach? Leo observed. With all respect, Your Holiness, I believe it diminishes your office. The Pope shouldn't have to perform like a servant. Leo suggested gently. Isn't that exactly what I should be, Antonio? A servant to God and to his people? The Cardinal had no answer for that. Elsewhere in Rome, Anton Berardi sat in the luxurious living room of his suite at the Hotel de Russie. Across from him, a journalist from a major international music magazine leaned forward eagerly, recording their conversation. "So you'll actually attend this performance?" the journalist asked. "Of course," Berardi replied smoothly. "I'm honored by the invitation. Many people think this whole concert is a response to what happened between you and the Pope at the charity event last month." Berardi gave a practiced shrug. "I think people are reading too much into a simple misunderstanding. The Pope and I share a love of music, that's all." "But you did publicly criticize his musical knowledge," the journalist pressed. "I made a joke that was perhaps in poor taste. We artists can be temperamental." Berardi smiled his most charming smile. "I'm looking forward to hearing His Holiness play. It's not every day one gets a private performance from the Pope. Do you expect he'll be any good?" The pianist paused, choosing his words carefully. "I understand he studied piano in his youth. Many people with busy lives maintain a deep appreciation for music, even if they can't practice regularly. I'm keeping an open mind." The truth, which Berardi would never admit aloud, was that he was deeply curious. His manager had been unable to uncover much information about the Pope's musical background, only that he had studied seriously before entering the seminary. The whole situation made Berardi uneasy. He had initially accepted the invitation to avoid looking petty, but now he was beginning to wonder if he had underestimated Pope Leo XIV. As the performance date drew closer, media attention intensified. Television crews from around the world descended on Rome, setting up equipment near St. Peter's Square. Social media buzzed with speculation, memes, and heated debates about whether the Pope's concert was inspired or inappropriate. Inside the Vatican, preparations continued at a feverish pace. Security measures were reviewed and enhanced. Sound technicians tested and retested the audio system in the basilica, ensuring that every note would be heard clearly throughout the massive space. 3 days before the concert, Pope Leo's schedule was cleared of all non-essential appointments to allow him to focus on his final preparation. Professor Ricci now spent 4 hours each day with him, fine-tuning his performance. "You're ready," she told him on the eve of the concert, after he had played the piece from memory without a single mistake. "Technically, perhaps," he agreed. "But I still worry about performing before such a large audience. I've spoken to crowds of hundreds of thousands without nervousness, but this feels different." Professor Ricci packed up her materials for the last time. "Of course it's different. When you speak as Pope, you're a vessel for something greater than yourself. You step aside and let God's message flow through you. Now you must do the same with music." She paused at the door. "Remember what I told you the first day? Music is prayer made audible. Tomorrow, simply pray with your fingers and all will be well." After she left, Pope Leo remained at the piano, playing the piece once more. Outside his window, the sun was setting over Rome, painting the sky in brilliant orange and pink. He thought about how much had changed in the 3 weeks since Anton Berardi had mocked him publicly. The incident that had seemed so humiliating at the time had opened an unexpected door, allowing him to reconnect with a part of himself he had set aside decades ago. Whatever happened tomorrow, he was grateful for that gift. Father Domenico entered quietly, carrying a light dinner on a tray. "You should eat something, Your Holiness, and then rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." The Pope nodded and closed the piano. "Have the final arrangements been confirmed with Maestro Berardi?" "Yes, he'll be seated in the front row as you requested, though Cardinal Rossi still thinks it's giving him too much prominence." "And the children from the hospitals?" Father Domenico smiled. 200 of them with their families. They're very excited. One little girl asked if you would be wearing your tall hat while you play." Leo laughed. "I'm afraid the mitre would make it rather difficult to see the keyboard." "Did you tell her that?" "I did. She seemed disappointed, so I promised her you would wear it at least for the entrance procession." "Then I shall. We can't disappoint our special guests." Later that night, after everyone had gone and the papal apartments were quiet, Pope Leo knelt in prayer in his private chapel. Usually his prayers flowed easily, but tonight his thoughts kept drifting to the concert, to the thousands who would be watching, to Anton Berardi sitting in the front row. "I am afraid," he finally admitted aloud to the empty chapel, "not of playing poorly or being embarrassed. I'm afraid of failing to show your love through this gesture. Help me to remember that this is not about my pride or Berardi's, but about something larger." As he finished his prayer, a sense of peace settled over him. Whatever happened tomorrow was in God's hands now. Across the city, Anton Berardi also found himself unable to sleep. He stood on the balcony of his hotel suite, looking at the illuminated dome of St. Peter's in the distance. His manager had arranged for a sleek black car to take him to the Vatican in the morning, and his designer suit was pressed and ready. Yet as the hour approached, Berardi felt increasingly uncomfortable with his role in the upcoming event. The media narrative had shifted over the past weeks. No longer was he the brilliant artist who had dared to speak truth to power. Now he was increasingly portrayed as the arrogant musician who had disrespected a beloved religious leader. Some of his most devoted fans had turned against him on social media. Concert halls that had been eager to book him were suddenly reviewing their upcoming season. His manager assured him this was temporary, that the controversy would blow over, but Berardi wasn't so sure. For the first time, he wondered if he should have simply apologized sincerely when the incident first occurred. But it was too late for that now. Tomorrow he would sit in the front row of St. Peter's Basilica and listen to the Pope play piano. And somehow, though he wasn't quite sure how, the world would be watching him as closely as they watched Pope Leo. As dawn broke over Rome on the day of the concert, both men prepared for an encounter that would change them in ways neither could anticipate. The morning of the concert arrived with a brilliant blue sky over Rome. St. Peter's Square was already filling with people by 7 o'clock. Though the performance wouldn't begin until noon, giant screens had been set up outside, allowing those without tickets to watch the unprecedented event. News vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes pointed skyward, ready to broadcast to millions around the world. Inside the Vatican, Pope Leo XIV woke before his alarm. He had slept surprisingly well, the anxiety of previous days replaced by a calm acceptance. Whatever happened today would happen. He went through his morning prayers with particular attention, asking not for success but for the right spirit to guide his hands and heart. Father Domenico appeared at his door, his face a mix of worry and excitement. "Good morning, Your Holiness."
"How are you feeling?"
"At peace," Leo replied simply. "And you look like you haven't slept a wink." "Someone had to worry," the priest said with a small smile. "The basilica is ready." The piano was tuned one final time at dawn. The children from the hospitals have special seating near the front, though not as close as Maestro Berardi. And Cardinal Rossi? Is he still predicting disaster? Father Domenico's smile widened slightly. He's been surprisingly quiet this morning. I believe he's finally accepted the inevitable. In truth, Cardinal Rossi had done more than accept it. Late the previous night, he had knelt in his private chapel for over an hour, wrestling with his own pride. He had opposed the Pope's plan from the beginning, certain it would diminish the dignity of the papal office. Yet as the day approached, he had begun to see something in Leo's approach that reminded him of the humility of Christ. This morning, the cardinal had surprised everyone by personally checking the basilica preparations, ensuring everything was perfect for the Holy Father's performance. Across Rome, Anton Berardi also prepared for the day ahead. He stood before his mirror, adjusting his perfectly tailored suit, but his thoughts were elsewhere. His career had always been defined by his confidence bordering on arrogance. Today, for the first time in years, he felt uncertain. "The car will be here in 30 minutes, his manager reminded him, looking up from his phone. "The streets around the Vatican are already crowded, so we're leaving extra early." Berardi nodded absently. "Remember what we discussed?" the manager continued. "Regardless of how the Pope plays, you applaud enthusiastically. The cameras will be on you as much as on him." "I know how to behave at a concert," Berardi snapped, immediately regretting his tone. "I'm sorry. I didn't sleep well." His manager's expression softened slightly. "This will be over soon. Next week we'll be in Vienna, and people will have moved on to some new controversy." But Berardi wasn't so sure. Something about this whole situation felt significant, in a way that went beyond temporary media attention. He had spent his life mastering music, climbing to the very pinnacle of his profession. Yet somehow, in a moment of petty irritation, he had managed to put himself in opposition to a man whose life was dedicated to something far larger than artistic achievement. As the morning progressed, the basilica began to fill. 4,000 seats had been arranged and everyone would be filled. Security was tight, with guests passing through metal detectors and bag checks. Inside, the atmosphere was unlike any normal papal event, a strange mix of concert hall anticipation and religious reverence. The massive pipe organ played softly as people found their seats. Many of the children from the hospitals were wide-eyed with wonder at the splendor of St. Peter's, pointing at the soaring dome and whispering excitedly to their parents. At precisely 11:45, a black car pulled up at a side entrance to the basilica. Anton Berardi emerged, flanked by Vatican security who escorted him to his seat in the front row. A murmur passed through the crowd as people recognized him. Some faces showed disapproval, others curiosity about how he would react to the Pope's performance. Berardi sat stiffly, intensely aware of the gazes fixed on him. Directly across from his seat stood a gleaming black grand piano, positioned so that the Pope would face the main congregation while playing. It looked terribly exposed, with no music stand to hide behind, no orchestra to share the spotlight. At noon exactly, a hush fell over the basilica as the organ fell silent. The central doors swung open and the familiar procession began. Altar servers with candles and cross, followed by priests and bishops in their ceremonial robes. Finally came Pope Leo XIV, wearing his formal vestments including, as promised to the little girl, his mitre. The congregation stood as he entered. As he passed the front row, his eyes met Berardi's for just a moment. The pianist was surprised to see no resentment there, only a calm acknowledgement. The Pope continued to the altar, where he led a brief prayer before addressing the gathering. "My dear brothers and sisters," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the basilica and to the thousands watching outside. "Thank you for joining us today for this special event. We are here for two purposes: to raise support for the children who need medical care, and to remind ourselves that music, like faith, has the power to heal divisions and speak to our common humanity." He made no reference to the incident that had sparked this unusual concert. Instead, he spoke briefly about the hospitals being supported and thanked all who had contributed to the cause. Then, with a simplicity that surprised many, he removed his formal vestments, revealing a simple white cassock beneath. An altar server stepped forward to take the heavy garments and the mitre. "Now," Pope Leo said with a small smile, "I will try to speak to you through music rather than words." He walked to the piano and sat down, taking a moment to adjust the bench. The silence in the basilica was absolute. Even the children seemed to understand the significance of the moment, watching with wide eyes as the leader of their faith prepared to reveal another side of himself. Leo placed his hands on the keys and closed his eyes briefly. In that moment, he remembered Professor Ricci's words, "Play it as a gift for your mother." He began. The opening notes of Schubert's Ave Maria filled the vast space, delicate yet clear. Those with musical knowledge could immediately tell that while the Pope was no professional pianist, he played with genuine skill and feeling. His technique was solid, if not flawless, but what caught everyone's attention was the emotion he conveyed. There was humility in his performance, a quality rarely associated with concert pianists who typically projected confidence and mastery. Pope Leo played as if offering a prayer, each note given its full value, each phrase shaped with care and reverence. In the front row, Anton Berardi found himself leaning forward slightly, his trained ear analyzing what he heard. The Pope's playing was imperfect. He could identify at least a dozen small technical flaws, but there was something in the performance that transcended mere technical evaluation. He had heard hundreds of pianists play this piece with greater virtuosity, yet few had captured its spiritual essence so effectively. As the Pope approached the challenging passage where he had stumbled so many times in practice, a barely perceptible tension appeared in his shoulders, but then visibly he relaxed, surrendering to the music rather than fighting to control it. The difficult notes flowed from his fingers with unexpected grace. A little girl in the second row, one of the hospital patients, watched with complete absorption, her small hands folded in her lap, swaying slightly with the music. Beside her, a boy who had been fidgeting moments before now sat perfectly still, captivated by the performance. Cardinal Rossi, standing at the side of the basilica, felt tears forming in his eyes. The Pope's playing wasn't just a performance. It was a demonstration of the very principles he preached: humility, courage, and the willingness to make oneself vulnerable in service of something greater. As the final notes echoed through the basilica, there was a moment of complete silence. Then from the front row, Anton Berardi rose to his feet. His face showed genuine emotion as he began to applaud, not the polite, diplomatic applause his manager had coached him on, but enthusiastic, heartfelt appreciation. The entire congregation followed, erupting into thunderous applause. The children from the hospitals clapped with particular enthusiasm, some jumping up and down in their excitement. Outside in the square, thousands more joined the ovation, the sound washing back into the basilica like a wave. Pope Leo bowed his head in acknowledgement, visibly moved by the response. When he looked up again, his eyes sought out Berardi in the front row. Their gazes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, respect, perhaps even the beginning of forgiveness. As the applause continued, the Pope gestured for Berardi to approach the piano. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. This hadn't been part of the announced program. Berardi hesitated, unsure of what was expected. Then understanding dawned on his face. Slowly, he made his way to the piano, where Pope Leo stood waiting. "Would you honor us with a piece, Maestro?" the Pope asked quietly, though the microphones carried his words throughout the basilica. Berardi looked stunned. "Your Holiness, I didn't prepare anything. I believe an artist of your caliber is always prepared," Leo replied with a small smile. "Perhaps something to complement what I've played?" The pianist glanced at the keyboard, then back at the Pope's encouraging expression. Wordlessly, he nodded and took the seat the Pope had vacated. As Berardi's fingers touched the keys, beginning Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, a perfect complement to the Pope's Schubert, the audience witnessed something remarkable. Not just extraordinary music, but a moment of genuine human connection that transcended words, pride, and past mistakes. Standing beside the piano, Pope Leo XIV closed his eyes, listening to the flawless technique and profound emotional depth of Berardi's playing. In that moment, the journey that had begun with public humiliation was transformed into something neither man could have imagined, a shared testament to the healing power of music, humility, and grace. The morning after the concert dawned clear and bright over Rome. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of Pope Leo's private chapel as he knelt in prayer, reflecting on the events of the previous day. The emotional weight of the performance still lingered with him, not just his own playing, but the unexpected moment when Anton Berardi had joined him at the piano. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Father Domenico entered, carrying newspapers from around the world. "Your Holiness, I thought you might want to see these." He placed the stack on a small table. "The concert is front-page news everywhere." Leo rose from his knees with a smile. "I've never been much for reading about myself in the press, Domenico. You know that." "Yes, but I think you'll want to see these particular headlines." Father Domenico spread several papers across the table. The Pope scanned them, his eyebrows rising slightly. "The Pope's musical miracle," read one. "Harmony at the Vatican," proclaimed another. A respected Italian daily featured a large photograph of the moment when he and Berardi had stood together at the piano, with the headline, "A Lesson in Forgiveness." "It seems our little concert made quite an impression," Leo said quietly. "It was more than a concert. Your Holiness, and you know it." Father Domenico's voice carried unusual emotion. "What happened yesterday? It showed people something they desperately need to see in today's world. And what is that? That reconciliation is possible. That pride can be set aside. That music and faith both have the power to heal divisions." The priest paused. "The donations for the children's hospitals have already exceeded 5 million euros, with more coming in every hour." Leo nodded, genuinely pleased but not surprised. People responded to authenticity, to moments of genuine human connection. Yesterday had provided such a moment. "There's something else," Father Domenico continued, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "This was delivered by courier this morning. From Maestro Berardi." The Pope took the envelope, breaking the seal to reveal a handwritten note. As he read, a smile spread across his face. "It seems our pianist has been doing some reflecting of his own," he said, folding the letter and returning it to the envelope. "He's asked for a private meeting." Across the city, Anton Berardi sat alone in his hotel suite, a cup of coffee cooling untouched beside him. His phone had been ringing constantly since the concert, with calls from his manager, concert promoters, journalists, and colleagues. He had answered none of them. Last night, after returning from the Vatican, he had sat at the window until dawn, watching the lights of Rome and replaying the day's events in his mind. Something had changed within him, something fundamental that he was still struggling to understand. All his life, Berardi had defined himself by his exceptional talent. His identity was inseparable from his abilities at the piano. When critics praised him as a genius, he accepted it as merely an acknowledgement of fact. When others showed less skill, he viewed it with thinly veiled contempt. Music was a competition he was winning, and that victory had justified everything: his arrogance, his occasional cruelty, his dismissal of those he deemed less gifted. Then yesterday, Pope Leo XIV had shown him something entirely different. The Pope had played with obvious technical limitations, yet his performance had moved the audience, had moved Berardi himself, in ways that technical perfection often failed to do. The humility with which he had approached the piano, the genuine emotion in his playing, had revealed music not as a competition but as a gift to be shared. And then, most astonishingly, after being publicly mocked by Berardi, the Pope had invited him to play. It wasn't just a generous gesture, it was a profound lesson delivered without a single word of rebuke. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His manager entered, looking both excited and confused. "I've been calling you all morning," he said, waving his phone. "Have you seen the press? This is incredible publicity. We need to capitalize on it immediately. I've got offers for interviews from every major network, and concert halls that were wavering are now desperate to book you." Berardi nodded absently, still looking out the window at the distant dome of St. Peter's. "Are you listening to me?" his manager pressed. "This is a golden opportunity. The narrative has completely turned in your favor. The pianist who played with the Pope, we can leverage this for years." "Leverage," Berardi repeated softly, the word suddenly sounding hollow and cynical. "Is that what yesterday was about to you? Something to leverage?" His manager looked taken aback. "I'm just doing my job. Your job is to play the piano. Mine is to make sure you have the best opportunities to do that. And if those opportunities come at the expense of my humanity? What are you talking about? This is the best press of your career." Berardi finally turned from the window to face him. "I sent a letter to the Vatican this morning. I've asked to meet privately with Pope Leo." "That's perfect. We can bring a photographer." "No," Berardi cut him off firmly. "No photographers, no press. This isn't about publicity. It's about something much more important." Later that afternoon, a plain black car with Vatican license plates arrived at the hotel's side entrance, away from the press gathered at the main doors. Berardi slipped out quietly and was driven through the streets of Rome. Few people recognized him without the usual trappings of celebrity: the entourage, the flashy car, the designer sunglasses he typically wore. The car entered the Vatican through a service gate, avoiding the tourists gathered in St. Peter's Square. Berardi was escorted through quiet corridors to a small, simply furnished room where Pope Leo waited alone, dressed in his everyday white cassock rather than formal regalia. "Maestro Berardi, thank you for coming," the Pope said warmly, extending his hand. Berardi took it, suddenly finding himself at a loss for words. He had rehearsed an eloquent apology on the way over, but now face to face with the man he had ridiculed, the carefully prepared phrases seemed inadequate. "Your Holiness, he began, then stopped, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Please, sit down." Leo gestured to a chair across from his own. "I believe we have much to talk about." "I came to apologize," Berardi said simply, taking the seat. "What I did at the concert was inexcusable. My behavior was... I have no justification for it." The Pope nodded, neither quickly accepting the apology nor dismissing it. "May I ask you something, Anton? Why did it happen? Not the immediate cause. I understand I made a comment about the piano that you overheard. But the deeper reason..." The question caught Berardi off guard. He had expected either easy forgiveness or stern reprimand, not this invitation to self-examination. "I've been asking myself the same question," he admitted. I think I've spent so many years being praised for my talent that I began to believe it made me superior to others. When I heard you comment on the piano, something I consider my domain, I reacted with pride, arrogance. "We all have our areas of pride," Leo said thoughtfully. "For some, it's artistic talent. For others, it might be intellectual ability or physical strength or even religious authority. He smiled slightly at the last one. The challenge is remembering that these gifts aren't meant to elevate us above others, but to be shared with them. Berardi nodded slowly. Your playing yesterday taught me that. I've performed that Bach piece hundreds of times, but never quite like that. Usually I'm focused on displaying my technical skill. Yesterday, for the first time in years, I played simply to offer something beautiful, to continue what you had started. They talked for over an hour, their conversation moving far beyond apologies into deeper waters. The purpose of art, the burden of talent, the challenge of remaining human under the spotlight of public attention. Berardi found himself speaking with an honesty he rarely showed even to those closest to him. While the Pope listened with genuine interest and shared insights from his own journey, as their meeting drew to a close, Pope Leo rose and walked to a small piano in the corner of the room, not the grand instrument from the concert, but a simple upright that looked well used. When I was first elected Pope, I stopped playing, he said, running his fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. I thought it didn't fit with the dignity of the office. Now I see that was a mistake. We should never set aside the gifts that make us fully human, no matter what position we hold. He turned back to Berardi. I have a proposal for you if you're willing. The children's hospitals we've been supporting need more than just financial help. They need ongoing programs that bring joy and healing to the young patients. Music therapy, Berardi said, immediately understanding. Exactly. Would you consider helping us establish such programs? Not just with your name or a donation, though those would be welcome too, but with your time and talent? Berardi didn't hesitate. I would be honored, Your Holiness. 1 year later, a small group gathered in the pediatric ward of Rome's largest children's hospital. Children in wheelchairs and hospital gowns sat in a semicircle, their faces bright with excitement despite their medical challenges. Parents and hospital staff stood behind them, watching with emotion as Anton Berardi played a lively piece on a portable keyboard. When he finished, the children applauded enthusiastically. A little girl with no hair, clearly undergoing chemotherapy, raised her hand. Can we try the song we've been practicing? She asked eagerly. Berardi smiled. Of course, Lucia. Everyone ready? The children picked up small percussion instruments, tambourines, maracas, simple drums, that had been distributed earlier. With Berardi leading on the keyboard, they began playing a simple but joyful tune they had been learning over the past weeks. None of them noticed when the door opened and Pope Leo XIV quietly entered, accompanied only by Father Domenico. He stood at the back, watching with evident pleasure as the children played with complete absorption, their medical equipment and challenges temporarily forgotten in the joy of creating music together. When the song ended, and the children noticed him, a ripple of excitement passed through the room. The Pope moved forward to greet each child individually, asking about their progress, both musical and medical, remembering names and details with genuine care. Later, as he and Berardi walked through the hospital corridor together, Leo spoke quietly. When you mocked me at that concert, I never imagined it would lead to this. Berardi nodded. Nor did I. It's strange how our worst moments can sometimes lead to our best if we're willing to learn from them. God works in mysterious ways, the Pope said with a smile, even through the pride of pianists and popes. That evening, news programs around the world featured images of the Pope and the pianist working with the children. But unlike the sensational headlines of a year before, these stories focused not on conflict, but on transformation. How a moment of public ridicule had evolved into a partnership that brought healing and joy to children fighting serious illness. In Vatican City, Cardinal Rossi watched the coverage in his office, a satisfied smile on his face. He had been wrong to doubt the Pope's approach, and he was man enough to admit it. What had seemed like a risk to the dignity of the papal office had instead enhanced it, showing the world a shepherd who truly lived the values he preached. And in a concert hall in Vienna, Professor Gabriella Ricci sat in the audience as a young pianist performed Schubert's Ave Maria. Though the young man's technique was flawless, the elderly professor found herself thinking of another performance, one less technically perfect but filled with genuine heart. Music was indeed prayer made audible, she thought, and sometimes the most powerful prayers came from the most unexpected sources. As for Pope Leo XIII, he still played his piano each evening, not for audiences or acclaim, but as a reminder that every gift we possess is meant to be shared. And every challenge we face contains the seed of unexpected grace.